Honey Badger Classic number 5 after show, in which we discuss the recent happening of Blair and Laci having speakings with each other. Also, a lot of cleavage in this one. All right, let's cleave into it.
We're very sorry about the side tube situation. We can play it and we can hear it, but we can't pause it. Luckily, there's 2 hours of it, so we'll just dip in and out. Here we go.
I don't necessarily have a specific question for you.
Okay.
But in particular, I'm interested in talking to you about your experiences
just give me a second here.
with feminism, and kind of how your perspectives on that have been informed.
Just start at the beginning. You know what? Let us start where it says it's going to start.
Okay.
Are we starting? Are you guys hearing this?
And talking about gender
more
generally.
Yeah.
It's in the 6th minute for me. Is it supposed to be?
I think we have different approaches to gender.
I can't send it back. It's completely
I think in a lot of ways.
None of it works. I have to keep pausing it. I'm just going to presume that they didn't say anything in the first 7 minutes, on the presumption that they're just like us.
Okay.
Okay, are you ready? Let's go.
Ground and some divergence.
Okay, yeah, that's a good way to put it. So, I mean, as far as my experience with feminism, I think that the way I differ from a lot of the other anti-feminist YouTube channels, obviously not all, but a lot of them, is that I've actually had quite a bit of experience with feminist activism in real life, not being one myself, but being surrounded by it. Being trans, I think it's easy in your teenage years to surround yourself with a certain type of people because on the surface, those kinds of people are going to be the most accepting of you. And I will say that on the surface, feminists really are the most accepting of trans people. I think when you really get down to it, they do more harm than good to trans activists, trans activism and trans people, but we'll get into that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found myself in this very large social circle with a lot of feminists, a lot of what we refer to as social justice warriors. And so kind of my experiences with them have shaped my views on it, having had firsthand experience, rather than, I feel like a lot of channels are people, from wherever they're from, and they talk about it because it's more of like they want to wreck feminists online and they want to be, win internet points. But for me, I started my channel desperately frustrated with feminism because being trans, I feel like it was always shoved down my throat, and there were aspects of it that I saw were very contradictory to transgender people. Things like arguing that gender is a social construct while simultaneously saying that trans people are born with, the opposite brains. And then some feminists often say that there are no differences between male and female brains, which is false. I actually saw like a video you did on that I kind of want to talk to you about.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about brains. I love brains.
You do want to talk about brains?
Yeah.
Yeah, brains are.
We can get there.
Okay. So
starting off with strong with Laci
and
her desire to talk about brains.
Zombie confirmed.
You say that I obviously have like some idea from watching your channel, but when you say that feminists do more harm than good in terms of advocating on behalf of and with trans folks, is there anything specific that you mean, or is it just kind of like a big amorphous blob of things?
It's a lot of things. The first thing that comes to my mind is it's very common within feminist spheres to argue that there is a lack of differences between males and females neurologically, and that gender is entirely socially constructed. And really what that reduces transgender people down to is that they just become performers of gender rather than behaving in a way that their biology and neurology is fueling them to behave, which is what I believe. And, I have a lot of sources to back that up, that it's not just one day you wake up and you're like, I want to be this. It's more of a, you're biologically fueled to feel that way.
So that's interesting because I feel like sometimes people feel the opposite way, as if to say that, the social construction view of gender is actually more accepting of the existence of trans people and just, a more broad idea of gender in general. Because if you say someone's brain or their gender comes down to their sex or their brain, right? Then it's sort of like, well, you are just your sex. You know, you are just, if you are born male, then you are male, and that doesn't change, and there's nothing different about it, right? So one of the things that I was confused about is, you know, you obviously see this through a different lens, and I'm trying to reconcile those two perspectives on gender. And my own view of gender is
she just worked really hard to not contradict Blair while contradicting Blair.
Can reconcile those, but I'm just curious.
But how does?
You feel like
But
there's like,
did she actually address what Blair asked?
No.
missing something?
Because it just sounded like Blair gave a criticism of feminism, and then she simply said, "No, that's not the case."
Yeah.
All right, let's continue.
Different genders because of what you said. I actually think that it goes against it because you can allow that there are anomalies within that there are male and female brains, and that there are anomalies within that that people can be born with. For instance, trans women are born with white matter levels similar to that of cis women. And that's one reason that scientists argue that they feel transgender, or they feel as if they should live as a woman. So a lot of times in the conversation of gender is socially constructed, those things are left out entirely. For instance, you had done a video talking about, I think you had specifically stated that there were no differences between male and females neurologically and in the brain.
I may have said that. I've been making videos for 10 years, but I actually don't subscribe to that view anymore because it's factually wrong.
Okay, well, that's good, because I was gonna, you know, kind of going on that a little bit. Not in a harsh way, but
sounds like she's about to cry.
Yeah, she does.
Since she was like, what, 12?
Understand yet, but there are some things that we do understand, right? And
Oh, okay.
as you
Sorry,
stated,
this is extremely
males
hard
and
to,
females. And I kind of actually just
because I don't have no ability to pause, except for when my internet is too slow for.
Necessarily talking about gender identity, we're talking about brains in terms of how they are sexed at birth. That's male, female, right? Those are the two main sexes. The vast majority of people fall in roughly those categories. And there is nuance in between, right? So I'm going to speak in generalizations here, fully acknowledging that there is some variation across sex. But like you said, you know, there is more white matter in female brains. There's more gray matter in male brains. Another male difference is that men have larger amygdalas in adulthood, which is related to emotions and emotional processing. That doesn't necessarily mean they
and
have.
Yet they say women are more emotional.
Either, like you know, the relationship is.
I have a question. Is it just me, or does she seem either on drugs or really nervous?
Really nervous.
Yeah, she's really nervous. She's wading into territory without a script.
I do not.
Okay, well, I'm not gonna be, well, at least she is doing it.
Yeah.
Although I don't find Blair threatening at all.
Well, you got to realize Laci's treading some water here. that's a tough territory, because she's going to contradict a non-feminist, anti-feminist trans woman on trans issues repeatedly. So she's got to politic the entire time she's doing it.
Okay, I'm gonna keep going.
Our brains. You know, like our brains are not just these static things that are just there and they don't change, and how you're born is how it will always be. That's absolutely not true. It's actually really amazing. Like, brains change every day. They change functionally, they change structurally. And when we're born, you know, infants generally have minus like a small size difference, about a 10% size difference. Males and females have roughly the same looking brains in MRI scans. And that's what they don't. Our brains do look different. Our brains are different in terms of some of the structures, the gray matter, the white matter, things like that. And that's really interesting in terms of what it means for gender.
Yeah, I guess then my point of contention would be with feminists with how much they downplay how much biology actually fuels our behavior.
She
For
keeps
instance,
clicking her
in
pen.
the cerebellum, men have more connections between hemispheres, which gives them more of an ability to act upon threats, and they're more in tune with turning a perceived threat into action. And it's that kind of a thing. Women have more connections across the frontal lobe, which contributes to kind of a nurturing being and taking care of children, that type of thing. And what's interesting for me is that, and what's interesting for me is that as a trans person, having gone from one set of hormones to the other, you know, when I was born and throughout most of my life, my body was dominated by testosterone and is now dominated by estrogen, is that mentally you go through more of a change than the body, which there are big changes when you transition. You go through a huge mental change. And so that's really shaped how I view feminism and gender relations as well. The fact that my entire life, I never wanted children, then all of a sudden I'm on estrogen, and a few months later I'm like crying looking at videos of baby monkeys and their mothers. Like, I guess I address my point of contention, like I said, is how much feminists tend to downplay it. And unlike yourself, you're saying that you don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think a lot do.
Well, so I want to capture the nuance here, because I'm not saying that gender is biological, because gender is social. Gender, like by definition in like psychology, refers to the social meaning that we ascribe to sex, right? It refers to how we make sense of sex, how we see people's bodies, and what we think that means.
Okay, so what she's doing now.
That's a feminist invention, actually. Gender used to refer to the sex of language, the sex of words.
Interesting. Okay.
Not really the sex, but
men should be physically
education
stronger.
on the sex of things and people.
Yeah.
It's still present in many languages, especially Romance languages. In English, it's almost completely gone.
Wow, that echo is
not just like your sex is your gender.
Yeah, it's pretty gross. I don't know whether I can actually do we should rant Zerk some of this
later on.
Yeah, well, we need
where we can pause it, because like there's no way to really make sense of any of this, you know, having to mute it in order to talk and all of that. Also, I have 2 teenagers and a puppy being obnoxious in the room with me right now. And a dog who's being really bitchy. Like, she's being a super cunt.
Okay,
my older dog is like, yeah, I'm not pleased with this puppy.
Do we have
I think
enough?
What we're going to see here, and what this entire video is going to be, is encapsulated in this moment that we've been watching right now. What she's trying to do is stand on both sides of the fence so as to be able to forward the idea that feminism is the controlling definer, the arbiter of gender issues, of sex issues, of trans issues, and everything, while not offending the trans woman she's talking to.
Why do they have such a problem with sex roles?
Well, you know, here's the thing, right? Like gender is, right? If you want to talk about sex and how men and women sort of have innate tendencies and predispositions, right? On average, that are different, right? And there are differences between them, and you want to talk about that, and that's a biological thing, and that's like totally cool. And if you want to talk about gender, well, we talk about gender all the time in terms of social constructs, don't we? The expectations that are placed on men, the obligations that are placed on men, right? Because in order to be perceived as men, right? As fulfilling their role. Georgia, I will fucking kill you. Don't you bare your teeth at that puppy. She just wants to be friends.
It's hard to teach the old dog new tricks.
Oh man, like they're like literally this puppy will, like, the Georgia will go to sleep, and then the puppy will go about 2 feet away and lie down and go to sleep, and then she'll wake up a little bit, and then she'll like kind of creep a couple inches closer, right? And then she'll like, you know, casually stretch, you know, oh, I'm just stretching, you know, and worm her way a couple inches closer, right? Until the old dog is like, yeah, fuck that, and gets up and goes away. And so, yeah.
And on the gender thing, honestly, feminists don't have a problem with gender roles per se. Feminists have a problem with specifically the areas of gender roles that place obligations
on
restrictions, or accountability on women.
Yeah.
Even if those same roles place obligations, restrictions, or accountability on men.
Yep.
When men face sole obligation, sole restrictions, and sole accountability, feminists have no problem
None
with gender roles. And when women are the sole beneficiaries of those gender roles, feminists have no problem with those gender roles. In fact, they will enforce the shit out of those gender roles. That's what he for she is all about, enforcing the aspects of gender roles where men's obligations benefit feminist women.
Yeah.
Let's do a little potpourri here. I'm gonna bamf it up past the hour, because apparently that's when Laci's tits get a little unhinged. Okay.
Not just gender, right? But like all kinds of things. We are like have figured out how to manipulate people's behavior, how to manipulate their emotions, and we can do that in social settings, and it's actually pretty like fucked up and scary, but that's a real thing. And like the implications for that in terms of the behavioral characteristics we ascribe to gender are real. And there are lots of ways that we're socialized. It's not just like, I am in this environment, therefore I am now this, right? It is actually a relatively complex process, socialization.
This is fun.
Yeah, I think we're just going to keep going back and forth between, you think it's more social, I think it's more biological. I don't really know how much we could even keep harping on that, to be honest.
So do you think that gender is social at all? Like, to what extent do you think is it socialized?
I mean, you think of things like fashion. There's
Am I annoying you guys yet?
Did you advance the video?
That's not a thing.
Yeah, I was
That's
like
entirely
jumping all
social.
over
But
the
again-
place.
But again, I think
Because for me, it
anytime
stayed
you
at the
talk
same
about that,
place
it's
all
the
the time.
expectations of gender that are
Oh,
socially
okay. Well, then
constructed.
I was just
I don't
entertaining
think-
myself.
Necessarily, no. There are certain
Ah.
small behaviors that are socially constructed.
Yeah.
such
Okay.
as
All right. I
Men
know
open
this
the
was
door for
aggravating.
women.
Did you see the
There's
link
even an argument to be made.
Which link?
with the? You know what? This is not going to work. We can't do this without Brian. Oh.
Yeah, we can't do it without the ability to pause and talk.
And why can't we pause and talk? Maybe
I
there's
don't
like
know.
a
Maybe
setting.
maybe it's actually like just an issue with SciTube right now, right? Like sometimes there's problems. Maybe they just didn't update and they fucked up. They done fucked up with their software, with their coding. They touched something way over here and it fucked something up way over there, and that's how coding works, right? So.
Okay.
You've been listening to your fiance about the coding practices, didn't you?
Oh my God. It's just honestly you know what he's working on now? He's working on networking. He has no experience with networking, right? And some competitor company subcontracted a portion of a phase 2 of our project. They totally botched phase 1, right? Went way over time, way over budget, fucked everything up, right? And then they're like, okay, we'll bring you guys on board to tell us if it's possible to even do what we said we could do, right? And so now he's got to set up like a little mock-up of this network that they want to make that would link 4 industrial sites via the internet so that people can monitor all of the operations remotely, right? Using a Palo Alto fucking router and Meraki freaking routers and all of this other shit, right? And
I think I got it.
and it's like they're like, they don't even know if they can do it. and they've already promised it, and then they subcontract out to like a company that has no experience with it. Find out if we can do it.
Yeah, I can do it. I can do it now.
You can
See?
do what?
I can pause now.
What? You can pause now.
Yes, because while you were talking, I fixed the problem. All right.
Oh.
We were at 6.
Acknowledge that some of the gender roles, like, you know, this idea that women are meant.
Remy,
Yes.
mute your clicking if that's you.
That's
That's not-
me.
Okay. All right. Well,
It's
whoever's
me.
clicking.
I'm the aggressive typer.
Oh, wow. I thought it was the French, but this time the French weren't to blame. Okay.
No, it's the Americans. We're always aggressive.
Should be physically stronger, like men,
Oh,
male.
I better unpause then, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, unmute
not necessarily
rather.
men. Males are on
Believe me, nothing of note has been said yet.
average larger, you know, and so those things, I think there's
What's the
there's a
timestamp that
legitimate,
you're
like,
at?
place.
1752.
Okay, good. Okay,
Okay.
We're
Let's
the same.
we're at the same place.
Yes, this is where we're starting. So far, almost nothing has been said. We had a lot of technical difficulties. I don't really think we've missed much.
In terms of our sex, the relationship between sex and gender is real, but it's complicated. It's not just like your sex is your gender, which is a little bit kind of the direction that you're talking about. And it's not just like your gender is completely removed from your sex. I think that that's inaccurate as well.
I think what you're groping for here, Laci, is you're trying to get Blair to agree that socialization gives you your sense of being male or female. And she's not
And she
going to agree
keeps-
to it.
She keeps saying it's complicated, and all I can think is it makes it sound like your sex is cheating on your gender with your gender's best friend.
Mm,
It's complicated.
the relationship status between gender and sex is
Sex is
complicated.
complicated. And that's why every gender atypical area of the spectrum between cis and trans has to have its own little label now. And you can be a trans cat or whatever.
A trans cat. Ugh,
What are they called? Animal kin or something, whatever the Tumblr writes.
Overkin.
Okay, Remy, if you're going to talk, you need headphones because it's almost it turns into a cacophony madness when you talk. All right, let's continue.
Now you're saying, you know, feminists tend to overemphasize the social element of it, right? And I think that that comes from the fact that it is actually gender itself is mostly social.
You talked for 18 minutes. Why don't you just come out and say to Blair, your lived experience is bullshit or it's bad and you should feel bad?
Because if she does that, then all of her followers that think she is not a TERF will know that she's a TERF. And all feminists have to eventually make that choice. Like it's like all rivers run toward the sea. As long as they have that idea that gender is almost entirely socialized and biology plays little or no part in it, all feminists must eventually run towards being TERF. They have to be trans exclusionary because they can't reconcile the idea that there is a biological propensity to identify as one gender or the other, and certainly not as the same gender. And if anybody identifies as the opposite gender and says it's biological, then there must be a propensity to identify as cis biologically as well. They can't acknowledge that and still crow that gender being the social construct they claim it is, it's malleable, and all of the things that they attribute to it are things that can be changed. You can't have your Teach Men Not to Rape campaigns if the behavior is not a socially constructed gendered behavior. And even if even if we can prove that what we can prove, and that is that it's not a male behavior and that it's not a common behavior, they can persuade people to go along with those campaigns as long as they can convince people that gender is almost entirely a social construct. So they're going to be heavily invested in that. So yeah, she's not going to be, she'll talk for 18 minutes, say almost nothing, come out with that one little line, and strive very hard to say things that Blair should be offended at without offending Blair. They won't find a middle ground because there isn't one.
Okay.
Like if we could quantify it, and neurologists, biologists, psychologists have tried to quantify it, they can't. It is mostly social, how we interpret our gender in the world, but that does not mean that it doesn't have any sort of grounding in sex and in our experience of our bodies. So I think that there's sort of this argument, right, that gender is biological, women's brains are smaller, women are less smart, we can't do math.
What?
Oh God, women's brains are smaller. The reason why women's brains are smaller is because their bodies are smaller on average.
And it doesn't actually have, it's been demonstrated that doesn't have anything to do with IQ. That the size of the brain isn't what dictates that. And that's another one. Feminists can't seem to argue that just because something exists doesn't mean that it's an every case thing, and it doesn't mean that you can make a rule based on it. They can only argue that it exists or it doesn't exist. So if something is the norm, if women's brains are different than men's in a way that makes women better at some things and men better at other things in general, feminists can't seem to get it through their heads that doesn't mean it's justified for men to say women can't ever be congressmen, or women can't ever be CEOs, and so on. They can't seem to make the tougher argument. They have to go for the easy argument. Oh no, that just doesn't exist.
What drives me crazy is Daphne Joel's argument, and that's essentially what Laci Green was highlighting Daphne Joel's research on one of the videos of hers that we rant-circed about how there's no such thing as a male or female brain. And she essentially said that there are no differences between the brains of men and women. But if there are, it should be politically unacceptable to do any research into that, because the only possible reason anyone would have to do research into the differences between men and women in brain size, structure, innate differences in preferences and things like that, is the only reason that anybody would actually be looking for that is to justify discrimination. But the problem with that line of argument is, and her own research showed that there were significant differences, that most males skew male in their brain structures, most females skew female in their brain structures, that there are very few very few brains out there where every single structure in the brain is male typical or female typical, but most of them skew in one way or the other, right? Quite heavily. And she speaks to the public about this as saying that there is no difference. The brain is a mosaic of male and female parts, and therefore there's no such thing as a male or female brain, and we're all just the same, right? And then she says, and even if we are different, we shouldn't look into what those differences are, because that would be used to justify discrimination. That's the only reason anybody would go looking for that information. But what you need to know when it comes to the reason why people want to know this stuff, what percentage, I guess, of it is nature and what percentage is nurture, or whatever, right? Or how heavily does nature influence this compared to nurture, is we want to know where justice lies, right? So if you have a society where 95% of the engineers are men and 95% of the nurses are women, right? if you believe that men and women are exactly the same and that they would be equally likely to choose nursing or engineering, right? You would think that that was because of discrimination, that this highly skewed thing is because of discrimination. You need to eliminate that discrimination. An injustice is being done, and we need to find a way to make that situation more just, right? But in order to actually understand where the natural balance would lie, what we could expect if everybody had equality of opportunity and everybody was raised in a sensory deprivation tank, completely, not acted on by any outside influence whatsoever, what would the percentage of
Everybody would be dead.
nurses be that are male? What would the percentage of engineers be that are female, right? What would that be if there were no cultural influences at all? Because we don't want to create an injustice via cultural imposition on people. We don't want to force socializing people against what they would normally, naturally prefer, unless it's necessary, right? Unless it's absolutely necessary for the functioning of society. So, if we have enough engineers, it doesn't matter if they're almost all men, because, everybody's doing what they want to do. If we have enough nurses, it doesn't matter if they're almost all women, because everybody's doing what they want to do, right? And do you create an injustice by socially coercing choices on people to comply with some fucked up vision of 50-50 representation, right? In places where it just does not suit people. Like I have said many, many times in the past, I would stab myself in the head with a toasting fork repeatedly rather than do my boyfriend's job.
Here's the thing, though. Even if gender was almost entirely a social construct, and even if these preferences exist almost entirely because of the social environment one is in, wouldn't an individual who, in the midst of all of this, is suddenly told, you must take an interest in STEM professions because we need 50-50 parity, be just as miserable as a person who never had that interest, rather than being because they were raised not to have that interest, never had that interest because biologically they're just not tempered to it? I mean, I would think it would be rather abusive for feminists to push what they push without going a couple of generations and fixing the environment that they're pushing it in. And they haven't done that. What they've done instead is push their version of gender roles and continue this social construct mode, while at the same time trying to force men and women raised in it to abandon the roles that they've grown up with and adopt the roles that feminists want them to take. It's not very humane.
So Remy wants to say something. Before you unmute, Remy, let's let everything settle down and have complete silence. So everybody mute so he can say something.
I didn't want to say anything. What are you talking about?
Oh, sorry. I put you on the spot. Okay, sorry for interrupting you, Hannah. Oh, it's you, Anthony.
That was basically it.
Okay. All right, I think I got...
I've been trying to speak for several minutes, and I don't think anyone can even hear me. So.
Oh, I can hear you now. Speak now.
Well, I was just going to say that Daphne Joel is the sort of person that, if she was a guy and in any other field, she'd be dismissed as a crank, because all she does is say, everything else is wrong because I say so and everyone else has to shut up. This is a good sign of someone who's just a crank. I don't understand why in this field...
Yeah, no, and she's head of like neuropsychology at the University of Tel Aviv.
Yeah, I know, but she's a crank. She's just straight up saying bullshit. straight up saying things that are completely out of line with everyone else's research, and she's the only one who can't back it up.
It's completely out of line with. It's completely out of line with her research. I've seen her speak about her research, and I've actually gone and looked at her research, and her research does not match what she's saying on, TV programs and in media.
And for someone whose career is completely propagated by the fact that what she's saying is politically popular, even though it's wrong, for her to stand up and say no one else should be able to research because it's politically inconvenient takes some weapon-grade gall.
Oh, it does. It absolutely does.
I want to just point something out to everyone. All of human history, it's been up to women to make everybody believe stupid bullshit that allows society to continue to function. Usually this involved some bizarre mythological construct that somehow always centered itself on the ruling theocratic, regime. So I don't see how this feminism is any different. That essentially what it does, it just promotes the myths that keep the current regime running. I have come to this conclusion, and I don't know what to do with it. Silence.
Yeah, well.
I was being silent because I caused an echo. Usually what happens is that you need a class of people who reinforce the reason for whatever mythology long after the mythology doesn't make any sense. Long after we either don't need it or we've reached a point where we can't otherwise convince ourselves to believe that it's true.
Well, and it's almost always women.
And I'm not saying that's because Karen, put your earbuds in.
It's not because women are bad. It's because women have that power.
It's because people listen to women.
Yeah, it's just because women have that power. They create the substrate. They create the game board. They create the divisions between people and the conflicts between people, and cooperation between people. They create the habits of statecraft. So they're imbued with the necessary work of maintaining the authority of the society and the government. And this is just what feminists do. And I don't know that they are required to maintain the system as it is.
Well, and it's usually women that herald in the next system too, isn't it?
From what I've seen, I actually have one data point, but then I don't know anything. There's recorded history is not very long. I think Göbekli Tepe may have put it back to like the 1200 prior to the current era. Like, and what I mean by that is, if we say today is 0, 1200 years prior to today. But before that, we have almost nothing for how human beings, aside from like
what archaeologists.
Yeah, and there's not what they call it is a signal. There's not a lot of archaeological signal prior to about 12,000 years ago, and most of the archaeological signal is in Göbekli Tepe, and that's a very small region in, I think, Turkey. So we really only can have enough knowledge about starting from about 9,500 years ago. And that's when there was a civilization prior. So there was a civilization from about 12,000 years ago to about, from the Younger Dryas, which was one of the big cooling events. After there was an ice age, we got warm, then we got cold again, and there was a period of time where we had agricultural settlements. Their domestication of plants was actually fairly rudimentary. And then we had potentially a climate event. But what's really interesting is that this event corresponds very closely with what we found genetically, or what those researchers have found genetically, in terms of 17 men for every 1 woman reproducing. So at that time, the same time where that was happening, we see a break in the architectural record, and we go from these more primitive settlements that are sort of pastoral, hunter-gatherers plus a little bit of domesticated grasses, wild grasses. And then we go to a much more sophisticated agricultural society with much more domesticated. And there's a break in the architectural record, and then bam, this much more complex agricultural society just suddenly takes over. And that's sort of when the written record really begins. So we go back to that, and it's mostly Stone Age. I don't even think they had written record. I meant written record in terms of archaeological, like more dense archaeological findings. From there to the current era is when we have some record of what's going on. I would say that I have one data point to suggest that women are required for this kind of a deep change, and considering what I'm seeing in terms of women versus men's abilities and strengths, that probably holds true. But like I said, I only have one data be the foundation of Rome. However, one data point that I can, there's mythology, there's language, there's stuff going on. There's written records. Well, not exactly at the founding of Rome, but there's written records later on. What I would say is that I think women might have been involved with that situation where you have 17 women reproducing for every one man, because that is a domestication. That's a situation you see with domestication. Like when we domesticate an animal, we often restrict the breeding of the males because we can, in order to breed the type of animal we want. So if you look at the record of a lot of domesticated animals, you'll see that they're descended from very few males, but a lot of females. And what's interesting to me about that is it probably would have been something that would have been maintained by women. And I'm wondering if it actually has something to do with the origin of much more complex language as well. And yeah, it's so probably what happened is you had two groups of people. You had one group that was breeding pair bonding, and then another group that was breeding in a harem situation. And what's interesting is this is pretty much what you see in the Ottoman Empire. And that's how a lot of empires structured themselves prior to iron, I believe, I could be wrong on this, because this is, again, conjecture because we don't have would be in order to deal with tribalism, in order to deal with the fact that women can form this tribe around them and then go to war based on whatever grievances, slights, grudges. What these societies would do is they'd essentially strip all the men out of the top of the society. So you would have a harem and then a whole bunch of eunuchs and one guy who was on the top. I don't know if I bored that other guy that he left, but so you would have the one guy on the top, the whole harem, and then the eunuchs around that, and they described it as like a form of asexual reproduction. But what else is really interesting is at the time that, they had the Bronze Age palaces, which are probably structured in this way to reduce tribal conflicts by simply it's like a way of taking women and taking away their weapons by taking away the men. So you can't form tribes without the men. And so you can have this governing structure that won't break down because there are no men for women to fight with each other with. So I just found that interesting. But what's interesting as well is that these Bronze Age empires apparently had what they call palace economies. And if you know what a palace economy is, it'll be probably very, very familiar. All of the goods in the land subjugated and the people who came to the city, all of the goods among the subjects all went to the palace. And the palace decided who got what. So all division of goods was central. In the society where he was
sort of like a heavily governed socialist economy.
Yeah, not just heavily governed socialist, like a heavily governed, like bloody, almost like a autocratic regime.
Like Russia. Like
yeah.
the Soviet Union, a heavily governed socialist economy. Like China.
Well, I mean, you could call Canada socialist, and we're not quite there yet. But
yeah,
everything,
but you've got a freer society. You don't have a dictator
yeah,
yet.
but that would be what it would be. It would be an incredible. It's a communistic, like everybody. All the things go to the palace. They go to the ruling group. They get distributed from the palace, and the ruling group is basically a harem. And what's interesting about the Ottoman Empire is the harem was comprised entirely of captured slaves. And the janissaries were comprised entirely of captured slaves. And the eunuchs were probably comprised of entirely of captured slaves. And the sultan was basically the son of a fucking slave girl, and the previous sultan, who was the son of a slave girl, and it's like this entire construction, all slaves, and yet it's the ruling structure. Except the ruling structure, really all it does is ensure that the society continues for the upper class. So we look at the sultan, we look at the harem, we look at the controlling and ruling society, but they're doing it for the benefit of the group over here, which is not reproducing 17 men to one woman or 17 women to one man. It's reproducing far closer to one man to one woman, and they are reaping the benefit of this, almost like they've turned this machine into they've turned this harem into a slave factory, even though it's ruled by a slave, and it's so fucking bizarre. And I wonder if something happened when we had that environmental change about 10,000 years ago, when we see in our genetic code, we suddenly start reproducing 17 women to one man. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, we have this explosion of agricultural technology, and more complex settlements. I'm wondering what the fuck happened. Like, was there a society, maybe just one or two, to have this kind of slave state, or the slave component, and the other side, the other half of the coin, the not the slaves, but the people who were the nobles, or the people of the original families, or whatever you call them, just sort of spoon the cream off of the product of the slave state. And they didn't even have to run it, because the slaves would run it for them.
So was that changed from that changed to the point where 17 women were reproducing for every one man? Was that a change from a more even ratio of reproduction?
Yeah, it was more even. It wasn't completely even. I'm not so sure. Like the science is really new, so it might be that they find out that it was more even, or there could have been another choke point. But look at the data.
Okay, but what I'm asking is the choke point. There was a before and an after at the choke point, right? And the after was the 17 to 1, 17 women to one man. That was the after point.
Okay.
And the before point was something else.
Let me look at the chart here. So what happened was that about 10,000 years ago, the number of women who were reproducing was probably at about 5,000-ish. 500. So the effective number of ancestors, 1,000. The effective number of ancestors for men was about 50,000. Now, the issue was there seems to be two choke points.
Okay, but what was the ratio? Because that really doesn't tell me what the ratio was.
1 to 10.
I keep hearing. Okay, so one woman to 10 men.
Yeah, it doesn't seem.
And then it was 17 women to one man.
Yeah. However,
it went from 1 woman to 10 men to 17 women to 1 man.
Let me take a look here. 70, 25.
Or is it 1 man to 10 women to 1 man to 17 women?
1 man to 10 women to more like 1 man to 1 man to 420 women.
Okay. So my suspicion here, I'm thinking about this. If we figure that in older societies, the men were protectors and the men were warriors and the women were not, there's a certain percentage of that that can be accounted for by the fact that a lot of men die young. The original, the 1 to 10. And then the one, when it doubled, the fact that basically the advent of slavery as part of intertribal conflicts might account for that, simply because slavers control the sexual partnership, the breeding habits of slaves in order to breed slaves with more desirable to the slaver characteristics. That is something that we know just from more modern history of slavers, and right down to the point where slavers, more modern slavers, actually engaged in sex with their slaves in place of the male slaves. They engaged with sex and with the female slaves, and the male slaves were left out in the cold. So it may very well be that the harem idea might be a valid idea, but it may also very well be that breeding was being controlled. And it's a lot easier to get a lot of breeding out of a male slave that has particularly desirable traits if you use a lot of women, because a woman can only have one pregnancy at a time, but a guy can get a whole bunch of women pregnant at once.
No, that's actually exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying,
but that's not really a harem, because a harem is, he owns the harem. He would, the guy gets benefit from the harem, whereas a slave is just forced into it. Do you see what I mean? Not all slave systems may have necessarily been run with the cleverness of convincing the slaves that they were in charge.
No, I know. I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Although it just occurred to me that the Sultan ends up being the alpha male slave.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Ottoman system was insane. It essentially, that's exactly what he was. He was the alpha male slave from each generation. And you're right. It probably started in much more basic slavery system, but then it evolved into that as they realized that this domestication of humans created a human that you could rely on to run a society for your benefit.
The ultimate scam, basically.
Yeah, but here's the question. How much are we still laboring under this bullshit now?
Well, look at the men that we have running our countries now. And
Alpha slaves.
Look at how they scramble when they're asked, what are they going to do for women? Even when women run for office, nobody ever asks, what are you going to do for men? They always scramble when they're asked, what are you going to do for women?
Not to mention, when women run for office, it's just taken as a given that they will just serve women and themselves, and people think this is how noble and positive. It's just taken as that women go into office to represent women and women alone.
But the thing is,
people were actually surprised when Anne Widdecombe in Britain stood up and said the whole idea of female representation is stupid and insane. Politicians represent everyone. Everyone looked at it like she was speaking in Dutch.
Yeah, so it's still that same situation. They're still in service. And I mean, being a politician, you're supposed to be in service to your community, but it is supposed to be the whole community. But we're not doing that, are we? We still have an elite class. It's just now we have an elite gender. But guys, I gotta go because I gotta get ready for work, and I can tell it's time.
Yeah, and we should probably let Mike actually sleep.
So I'll talk to you guys later.
Yeah, and you should probably let me clean up the fucking pee on my floor.
Okay. You enjoy that.
Yeah, no, 34 hours we've had her, and this is the first accident, so that's actually not that bad.
Dog water sports. Okay.
Oh my god. At least she wasn't looking me in the eye when she did it.
Mike, are you there?
Hi folks, thanks for coming out. It's been emotional.
Oh my fuck. You sound really tired.
I'm gonna get an hour. I'm gonna get a good solid hour of healthy ass sleep. It's gonna be great.
You
Sleep
might as well skip sleep at this point. Maybe better.
That's always what I start thinking, like when I start drifting off. But then I get a good 15 minutes sleep, and then I wake up and think, God damn it! I wish I'd stayed awake. It'll be fine.
Okay. You'll be okay. You know that you never recover lost sleep.
I almost don't know how to take that.
Take it hard.
Take it hard.
Take it hard, just like you sleep.
It's one of those trees
Sleep
falling in the
hard.
woods things, isn't
Take
it?
it hard.
Yeah. Are we out?
Oh, hang on. 3, 2, 1.